As the Pentagon tries to figure out how it's going to pay for the new armed conflict in Iraq and combat the Ebola virus in West Africa, the Afghan government claims it is broke, asking the U.S. for an immediate $537 million bailout. Without it, the government in Kabul says it won't be able to pay its employees.
Soon there will not be a single American member of the military in the country of Afghanistan. At least that's what we're being told. But there's a lot more to the end of a strong American presence in this country, with another type of war already lost, and plenty of new questions about where our foreign policy is actually heading to keep us from falling into this black hole again. Welcome to MidPoint. A career Army officer and now the senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation, Richard Brennan, joins us today. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I find it very interesting that a report now comes out that here we are asking Iran to help us. And again, this all comes down to our foreign policy and how we're going to deal with Afghanistan. Apparently asking the Iranians, of all people, to help establish Afghanistan's first pharmaceutical company and in developing 4 mines to help prop them up. Is this smart foreign policy?
You know, Iran has been our sworn enemy since 1979, not by our choosing, but by their choosing. And if you look at the history of Iranian actions towards the United States, they were responsible for the Beirut bombing, the Khobar Towers bombing. In Iraq, they were responsible for over half the casualties, killed and wounded of Americans in Iraq through the Shia militias that they supported. When Iran says that we are the great Satan, they mean it. And I think having any dealings with Iran on security issues would be a grave mistake.
Then making this kind of a grave mistake, does it show how far we've dropped in being able to do anything there on our own, and how even as we're leaving, as many people would say, this is, and I mentioned this in the lead-in here, this is a black hole of a nation in the Middle East, and sooner or later, thanks to what we've done, we are going to get sucked back in it no matter what we do. Is that fair?
I think that is fair. I think it's fair to look at the fact that we went in there for issues that were of significant, vital interest to the United States. We've been fighting a war for 13 years because it's in our vital interests. And the thought that we could just walk away from this without leaving in place a security structure that's able to address the issues of the Taliban, of the Haqqani network, of Al-Qaeda that's currently in Pakistan, makes no sense at all. The reality is that if we don't deal with this and we don't figure out a way to develop a strategy that addresses the long-term interests of the United States, we will be coming back there in two years after the last withdrawal, because the entire country will start to fall apart.
Richard, here's a question I hear from a lot of people, and you just brought this up, where we're talking about using the word vital to America here. Honestly, is there anything, and you'll hear Americans ask this question all the time, is there anything really that vital in Afghanistan anymore that we have to take a chance on losing more lives?
What's vital in Afghanistan, and it's the same what's going on in Iraq and Syria, is that without U.S. presence and a country that's willing to address the issues, the ideological challenge by Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda affiliates, you create a safe haven that will then be used by these organizations to not only threaten our friends in the region, but someday threaten Western allies in the United States. The only way that we can address this issue is a long-term strategy dealing with these organizations, bringing in the countries in the region, finding out where our interests are aligned, and finding a way to make certain that this regional strategy addresses those interests that are at stake for the United States.
How can we then have a regional strategy if we know going right in at the very beginning that a lot of these people we're going to deal with in the first place, they hate our guts. They would just as soon walk on us as they would even deal with us. So how do you develop a strategy with people who don't like you?
And this is going to require some very hard discussions and negotiations with countries like Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, looking at Turkey, bringing Turkey on board to what's going on in the region. We have to understand that where we're going to align our interests. And unfortunately, we have one of two choices. You either align ourselves with the Sunni countries that I've just outlined and others, or align yourselves with Iran, because at the end of the day, in the Middle East today, what you have is a Sunni Shia struggle for power that is not only on a religious and ideological basis, but is also looking at major powerhouses in the region. Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey.
And you just mentioned two countries in there, if I might interrupt. You mentioned Qatar and Turkey, two countries right off the top that we know we can't trust, and that are already, I mean, Qatar is actually fueling, they're funding a lot of what goes on in Afghanistan right now with the Taliban. Turkey already doesn't want to take any action. So how do we change their minds? Honestly, this seems like a completely impossible task. We can't do it.
I think it's a very difficult task, but this is what's required when you get a great power like the United States has to get engaged. That you have to convince these nations that we're there to stay. One of the great problems that we created by leaving Iraq in 2011 and by some of our policies related to the Arab Spring is that we persuaded or convinced many of the countries who relied on us that we weren't committed to the region. The pivot of the administration to the Pacific and some of the verbiage since then has convinced them all the more. And so they're looking for internal ways to solve these regional disputes rather than what had been done for the majority of the 20th century was rely on the United States to advise and assist and help guide them. We have to go back to that former model.
Is it fair to say then that if we have to go back into Afghanistan again in 2 years, and I'm going to be blunt about this, as some people have wanted to be, that the blood of the soldiers who die in Afghanistan will be on the hands of the Obama administration for their quick pullout?
I'll just put it this way. When we left Iraq, there was a sense of dismay among many of the military who looked at the last 8 years and 8 months of their labor and sacrifice and thought that it was in vain. I think the same type of feeling will be felt by the American military if we leave Afghanistan in a manner that doesn't protect the gains. We have sacrificed a lot in money, probably $2 trillion between Iraq and Afghanistan, the treasure of our nation, are the sacrifice of our soldiers, and to leave these conflicts without having an overarching strategy to how to protect the gains, I think is something that is unconscionable. I
hate to say this out loud, but I got 30 seconds left, and there are some people out there who would just say, let them fight it out, let God kill them, and let God sort them out. Is that the strategy here that we have to take?
I hope it's not the strategy, because at the end of the day, if that is the strategy, we will find our interests threatened in other ways that I think will come back to haunt us in the long end. Although I'm afraid that that's the tack that this administration is about ready to take.
That is a scary point indeed. Richard Brennan from the RAND Corporation, thank you so much for being here. I'll look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
All right. We'll have to talk to him again soon because this is just getting worse. We kick to the Money Master after the break with some unwelcome news for Apple users. Let's face it, you're an Apple user. You know there's no problem. Malware, you laugh at malware. You scoff at it. You have no problem with it. That's right. Ha, don't worry. We're not Windows. Guess what? Life's about to get more difficult. Stay with us as MidPoint continues.